Alright, so the quality's ridiculous and grainy and awful, but this also means I don't have to attempt to look nice because I am quarantined in my house and I really, really don't care. You've all seen me before. You know what I look like on a bad day, so whatevs. Um, Not for children. Awesome book. Grown-ups, I say as my 5-year-old comes in. Hi, Peanut. I'm done. Go put it by the sink. Thank you, Bubby. All right. This is the Merry Spinster Tales of Everyday Horror by Mallory Ortberg. It is brilliant. I love fairy tales because they tell us a lot about what it is to be human in various different ages. I particularly like it when modern storytellers kind of take these tales and twist them around and make them dark and horrible, because if you're watching this, you know me, and sometimes I like things that are just dark and horrible. So there you go. This is The Rabbit. Sarah Haight, this is specifically for you, my darling. There once was a Velveteen Rabbit, and in the beginning he was really splendid. Later he was something other than splendid, but this was the beginning, and splendid will do for a start. He was fat and sleek as a good rabbit should be. His coat was skewbald with deep rust-brown patches. He had real thread for whiskers, and inside of his ears were slick pink. It was Christmas, and there were other presents in the boy's stocking, but the rabbit was the best of all. For at least 2 hours the boy loved him, and then the family came to dinner in great clumps of aunts and uncles and cousins, and there was frantic unwrapping of parcels and paper. In the excitement of looking at all the new presents, the Velveteen Rabbit was put aside. And he learned for the first time what it was to be ignored, and he did not forget it. For a long time he lived in a cupboard with the other unnecessary toys. Hey, no, because I'm reading a story. Can I read a story? Thank you. For a long time he lived in a cupboard with other unnecessary toys, and no one thought very much about him. As he was made merely of velveteen, and his ears were of georgette rather than real satin, some of the more expensive toys snubbed him, and he did not forget that either. The mechanical toys were very superior and looked down on everything that neither clacked nor opened or shut on command. You do. That was not a model of a plane or a boat or a car. Even in the model train, which could run only on magnets along the tracks that it was sold with, could not be pushed along a table or a floor, never missed an opportunity to refer to his engineering in the most technical of terms. The rabbit could not claim to be a model of anything, for he didn't know that real rabbits existed. He thought they were all stuffed with sawdust like himself. Sometimes he imagined what the other toys would look like, with fistfuls of sawdust jammed in their open eyes, in their painted mouths, down into their stomachs. Among them all, the rabbit was made to feel very insignificant and commonplace, and the only one who was kind to him at all was the Skin Horse. "Whose skin do you have?" the rabbit had asked him, and the Skin Horse had shivered to hear the excitement in his voice. "Whose skin did you get?" "Not like that," he explained. "Not skin like that." The rabbit sat in silence, and the Skin Horse knew he had not liked the answer. The Skin Horse had lived longer in the nursery than any of the others, and he was so old that his coat was rubbed bald and most of the threads of his tail had been ripped out. He was wise, for he had seen a long succession of mechanical toys arrive and swagger and break their springs and pass away, and he knew they would never turn into anything else. The rabbit would not like the mechanical toys, and he would not let himself pass away. The rabbit would not break for anything. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day when they were lying side by side on the nursery floor. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and stick out handles?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the Skin Horse. The rabbit, who had quite liked the idea of having something buzzing inside him, was rather disappointed at this. "But a thing that happens to you when a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you. Then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt quite so much." That was a relief to the rabbit, who was more than a little let down by the dull real being sounded. Can you hurt something else? Asked the rabbit. When you become real. I don't know, said the Skin Horse, for he was always truthful. Can you take someone else's real? He asked. Or are you stuck having to get it brand new each time on your own? The Skin Horse looked at the rabbit then. What I mean is, the rabbit said carefully, and his voice was a crawling black thing across the floor. If something else was already real, could you take it from them and keep it for yourself? No, the Skin Horse said. You can't take real from another toy. A truth which was no small relief to the Skin Horse, who was no fool and could tell in what direction the conversation was trending. But the rabbit had not yet finished with his questions. Can you take the real out of a boy, then? Can you take his heart into your own self, leave him stuffed with sawdust on the nursery floor in your place? And the Skin Horse did not say anything to that. I suppose you are, said the rabbit, and the Skin Horse was afraid for the first time in a long while. Yes, he said quickly, closing his eyes, from the boy's uncle. That was a great many years ago, but once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always. I wonder if that's true, the rabbit said. It is true, the Skin Horse says. It is very true. And he kept his eyes closed. How did you make him? The rabbit, who was no longer laying down, asked with a terrible sort of eagerness. How did you make him give it to you? But the Skin Horse did not move and did not talk again. The walls of the room were old and yellow and painted with late afternoon shadows, and suddenly the Skin Horse felt he had been real for too long. After that, the Skin Horse was seen no longer in the nursery, and the rabbit's eyes gleamed a brighter black, and his ears glowed a livelier pink. In the nursery there was talk of a tiresome sort of person called the nanny. The nanny was difficult to anticipate. Sometimes she took no notice of things lying about, and sometimes, for no reason whatsoever, she swooped about the place like a windstorm and bundled all the toys away in the cupboards. She called this tidying up, and everyone but the nanny hated it. The rabbit especially hated it, and he did not forget the times he had been tidied. The rabbit was not in the business of forgetting, especially once he decided that he had been cheated of something. After one such tidying, the rabbit had been cheated of his place on the floor, and he would not forget it. The nanny was most assuredly not real. Sometimes the rabbit thought it was entirely possible that nothing at all was real, that real had been a lie of the Skin Horse from the beginning. But if there was real, the rabbit would find it. If there was not real, then the rabbit would decide what would happen next. One evening when the boy was going to bed, he couldn't find the little white horsehair dog that always slept with him. The nanny was in a rush, so she simply looked about her, and seeing that the toy cupboard stood open, she fetched the rabbit out with an efficient hand. Here, she said, take the old bunny. He'll do to sleep with. And she dragged the rabbit out by one ear and put him into the boy's arms, and the rabbit felt the realness of the boy's warm heartbeat, and the boy's soft and fluttering throat, and he knew that the Skin Horse had not been lying. That night, and for many nights after, the Velveteen Rabbit slept in the boy's bed. At first, the rabbit found it rather uncomfortable, for the boy hugged him very tight, and sometimes he rolled over on him, and sometimes he pushed him so far under the pillow that the rabbit could scarcely breathe. The rabbit found he missed the long, dark quiet of the nursery when everything else in the house slept and was still. The boy did not sleep like everything else in the house. The boy slept in motion, and he snored and rolled over and grunted and chapped his lips and muttered in his sleep. The boy had jammed on his bedclothes and shoved crackers into his flat and flabby mouth, but the rabbit bore his discomfort graciously and waited for the boy to start loving him. The boy insisted on talking to the rabbit, spilling the secrets of his stupid and inane boy's heart, and he made ridiculous tunnels for the rabbit under the bedclothes that he said were like burrows that real rabbits lived in. Then the rabbit knew that there were others like him, and that the boy had kept him from them. and he did not forget that. And when the boy made him play his insipid games after the nanny had gone to bed, the rabbit burned in shame and anger. So when the boy dropped off to sleep, the rabbit would giggle down under the boy's small, hot chin and above his small, hot heart and listen to his dreams. And then it was the rabbit's turn to play. On some mornings the boy would wake up dizzy and red-faced and cross and tangled in his bedclothes, and on some mornings the boy would not get out of bed at all. One morning the boy woke up and was sick in the hallway. The rabbit was his only comfort then, on mornings when his limbs were so sleep-heavy that he stumbled on the way to the kitchen and spilled his breakfast with a trembling hand, and he grew afraid of the body he lived in. So time went on, and the little rabbit was very happy. Spring came, and there was long days out in the garden, for now the boy never went anywhere without his rabbit. There were rides in the wheelbarrow and picnics on the grass near the nursery door. The boy could not go past the flower border without becoming quite short of breath and complaining of dark stars behind his eyes. Once, when the boy slipped and fell down and had to be carried inside, the rabbit was left out on the lawn until long after dark. And the nanny had to come and look for him with the candle because the boy couldn't go to sleep unless he was there. The rabbit was wet through and through, quite earthy from creeping along the burrows the boy had made for him in the flower bed, and the nanny grumbled as she cleaned him off with a corner of her apron. She had not seen him when he was bunching things streaming darkly through the tunnels under her feet, and the rabbit rejoiced that he had not been seen until he wished to be. "You must have your old bunny," she said to the boy. "Fancy all this fuss for a toy." The boy sat up in the bed and thrust out his shuddering hands. "You mustn't say that! He isn't a toy! He's real!" When the little rabbit heard that, he was too happy to sleep. That night he grew fatter and sleeker and stronger, and into his boot-button eyes that had long ago lost their polish, there came a look of happiness so bright that even the nanny noticed it the next morning when she picked him up and smiled to see it. That day the boy was especially ill and complained of a thick feeling in his lungs and dust in his eyes. The nanny was cross, for she was never ill, and there was nothing the healthy find more tiresome than the sick. "Is there anything else you need, love?" she said, bustling about the sick bed. But the rabbit knew she meant, "Why don't you get up and get better?" "Why don't you get up and get better?" the rabbit whispered to the boy that night. The next morning the boy woke with 4 teeth cracked open at the root. Now it was summer, and the sun shone so hot that all the next month the servant found fox after fox lying along the edges of the grounds like gifts, mouths strewn open and flecked with white, quite dead from the heat. Near the house there was a wood, and in the long summer evenings the boy liked to go there after tea to play. On the evenings that he could stand and keep both eyes open, he would march off brokenly, dragging a wagon with the rabbit riding behind him. Some nights, as the sun set and his lips cracked and bled, the boy would cry a long, noisy child's cry, and the rabbit would endure it with perfect patience as the boy built him a nest and told him all his stupid, childish sorrows. One evening, while the rabbit was laying alone in the grass watching the light play over his own splendid paws, he saw 2 funny little creatures creep out of the tall brush near him. They were rabbits, like himself, but differently made, as they seemed quite brand new. Their joints didn't show in the least, and they changed shape queerly as they moved. One minute they were low to the ground and whispered, and then the next, thickly gathered together into a neat bundle of flesh. They slid and spilled about him, one quite the shadow of the other. The rabbit stared as they crept close to him, looking for the key that wound them up and made them jump so. The rabbits stared back at him, twitching their noses all the while, until one of them finally asked, "Why don't you get up and run with us?" "Don't feel like it," said the rabbit, which was true. "Don't you?" asked the other rabbit. "It's easy as anything," and he gave a great, juddering lurch sideways and caught himself violently on his hind feet. "I don't believe you can do it," he said. "I can," said the rabbit. "I can run like anything, and jump too." And he meant it. "Can you?" asked the laughing, lurching rabbit, and he shivered from side to side in a funny little hopping sort of dance. The grass behind him was pale, and the long, slim trees behind paler still. The garden was a shuddering black thing, and the winding path back to the house a ghastly river, white as termites. The Velveteen Rabbit could only sit madly in the middle of the pale path. He had no hind legs at all. Only a single stiff brushed cushion his head was sewn onto. "Don't want to," he said again. But the slumping, slinking rabbits had very sharp eyes, and they peered at him, and stretched out their necks widely and gaped at him as much as they pleased. "He hasn't got any legs to run with," one of them said to his rabbit shadow, and they each grinned at him with their mouths. "He hasn't got any legs to run with," the other creature bobbed his head up and down in gibbering agreement. "I have got them," cried the little rabbit wildly. "I have got them. I'm only sitting on them. I don't care for you to see them." All right, that's not going to work, kid. One rabbit danced closer and thrust his eyes up under the Velveteen Rabbit's nose, then shook his head and flattened his ears and jumped backwards. "You don't smell right," he said. "You don't smell right at all. You aren't anything that I know of, and you aren't real." The other twitched his nose in agreement. Just then came the slow, slumping sound of the boy approaching. With a fierce, whirling feet, the rabbits disappeared. For a long time the Velveteen Rabbit lay there, very still, looking at the grass and everything that moved over it and everything that moved under it. The sun trembled lower and lower in the sky until it tipped and spilled itself out over the grass. Presently the boy came limping back to the white path and picked up the rabbit and carried him home. Months went by, and the rabbit grew soft and tender like new skin from touch, and the boy loved him all the more for it. And the rabbit loved him back. He loved the boy until his freckles faded and his head ached and his breath came in hard, sharp gulps like a dog's. One day the boy caught a fever, and dark red patches bloomed high on his cheek, and he wept in his sleep, and his little body grew so hot it burned the rabbit when the boy clutched him close. Strange people streamed in and out of the nursery, and the light began to burn all through the night. And through it all, the little Velveteen Rabbit lay there, hidden under the bedclothes. The rabbit found it a long and weary time, and worried that someone would spot him and take him away. But he knew how to be patient. He thought of the stupid skin horse who had waited years to become real. He thought very hard about what it would be like if the boy should get well again, and how they would go out into the garden and play splendid games in the raspberry thicket. All sorts of daylight things he planned, and while the boy lay half asleep, he crept up and close to the pillow and whispered into his ear. The boy's skin grew white and thin as moth wings. His joints seized up, thick and angry, and he cried out when his nanny moved his legs to change the sheets. The boy's teeth trembled, and his eyes darkened, and his brain had fire inside of it. The boy hurt, and the rabbit got realer and realer by the minute. The boy no longer whispered his stupid secrets to the rabbit because his tongue had swollen up into every corner of his mouth. The boy scarcely moved. The boy gazed at the rabbit and loved him, and the rabbit loved him back very hard, until at last the boy stopped moving at all. It was a bright, bold morning, and the windows had been thrown wide open to let the breeze in. They had carried the boy out of the room, wrapped like a new toy. The little rabbit lay tangled up among the bedclothes, with just his head peeping out, listening as they talked about arrangements and doctor's orders. The entire nursery was to be disinfected, and all the toys that the boy had ever played with were to be burned. The rabbit was very happy to think of them all burned, although he was sorry to miss the disinfecting. He rather thought he would enjoy being disinfected, perhaps even as much as being real. Just then the nanny caught sight of him and popped him directly into the sack with old pictures and books and stiff-kneed toy soldiers and a lot of other rubbish, and carried them outside to the end of the garden where they were to be turned into a bonfire. The boy was not turned into a bonfire. The boy was wrapped up neatly and buried face down in the dirt, and he was no longer real. The rabbit promptly forgot him. While the boy lay clenched fist in the dirt, dreaming of whatever it was that not real things do, the little rabbit lay among the old nursery clutter in the far corner of the garden, and he wriggled his head this way, and he wriggled his head that way, and bit by bit he was able to get his head through the opening and look out. Everything around him was going to be burned, all the boats and the tin soldiers and the little wheeled dogs on drawstrings, and the rabbit only wished he could stay to see it. But there were slick new pink muscles curling under his skin, and lungs unfolding at the end of his throat. He had a forest to visit, and 2 particular rabbits to see. He shook out his left leg, and that was real. And he shook out his right leg, and that was real too. He felt his warm heart beating inside his chest, as strong and as fast as a boy's.